Oh boy, this is gonna be a long one. I've had a bit of time to sit with Gotham Knights, really let it settle, and I've decided to wage an active war against this piece of plastic. From what I've seen from gaming outlets, YouTubers, and user reviews, everyone's kind of settled on this game being average, meh, maybe a notch below that, but I'm here to argue that that's way too nice of a stance for this game. As always, if you're a fan of Gotham Knights, more power to you. Please don't take this video as an attack on you or your interests. In fact, I'd love to hear your rebuttals and what you liked about it in the comments, because if I get 30 odd minutes of me talking about how Gotham Knights ruined my life, it got me hooked on meth and plowed my wife, you should at least be given the chance to fight back. Full spoilers going forward, like proper spoilers. I wanted to keep everything kind of vague at first, but that doesn't work with how I wanted to tackle this game, so yeah, be warned. Also, the structure of this video is going to be a little bit abnormal. Instead of having a couple of big sections and talking about the good and bad of each, I'm going to basically talk about the aspects of this game, big and small, from best to worst. So you're essentially just going to be watching me slowly go insane throughout the course of this video. Should be fun. My favorite thing about this game is the thing that makes me the most irritated in a weird way, because it shows that it was capable of being so much better than it is. There are a handful of set pieces and levels throughout the campaign that stand out against the rest of the experience and genuinely seem like they were made by an entirely different team than everything else. For example, in the first fight with Mr. Freeze during his extended side mission, an entire skyscraper is encapsulated by ice, with icicles protruding out of nearly every inch of the building and only a small linear path being left for you to reach the summit. We'll talk a bit more generally about Gotham City's candy cane aesthetic later in the video, but I will say that the vibrant colors really bounce off the ice nicely and it creates a great build up for the fight. The second freeze fight also looks really cool, and in the main story I found it pretty enjoyable to explore the cave where the Court's talons come and ambush you. It felt like I was actually exploring the secret winding cave system that housed Gotham's darkest secrets, and even that pales in comparison to the labyrinth scene, which is filled with death traps and actually frames your deaths and failures on the walls once you get sliced and diced and broiled. It also shows you some pretty cool visions, distorted versions of your past and future, and if you want to throw in stuff like the Clayface bike chase with him morphing in front of you, you could definitely create a supercut of this game that lasts about an hour long, showing an absolutely incredible Bat Family game. It would have still had some problems with the basic gameplay, but the sequences would seem great. The interiors in this game are generally pretty stellar, and when the game decides to actually make a handcrafted mission, it usually turns out solid. The issue, of course, is that it can only be bothered to do that a couple of times throughout the whole damn game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The level design and big action set pieces are the best thing about Gotham Knights in my opinion, even if there's way too few of them to actually save it. The customization options seem like the part of the game that got the most love and attention. These suits all look really cool and maybe sometimes a little goofy, but everyone will find something to their taste here. A lot of this stuff is inspired by the comics, but there's a few original suit designs in there and they look pretty good. And it's nice that the game has a transmog system that lets you choose the suit with the best stats without having to sacrifice the way you look. You also transfer levels between characters, so you don't have to grind with all of them if you want to play as somebody in the end game. They all just end up at the same place, which is pretty nice. Unfortunately, despite this being one of the best parts of the game, it's also deeply flawed. If you're wearing an outfit, you can apply a transmog that lets you look like you're wearing a different suit that you've unlocked, but the kicker is that you can only apply the default version of that suit. So even though each outfit has different colorways and a few different options for your cowl, symbol, arms, and legs, you don't get any of those options when you apply a transmog. That kind of nullifies the whole not having to sacrifice your look for your stats idea that the system is supposed to address. It's just a confusing decision. Also, you get gear by either picking it up as is or crafting it, and while the game lets you craft anything in the open world, those items won't be available to you until you go back to the Belfry and end your patrol, which is just an unnecessary hassle. That's one of those problems where the game almost feels like it's being petty, like you're just making my life harder for no reason. Sure, I understand the semantics of it all, the crafting table is back there in the Belfry, but I mean, come on, we got teleportation and magic air jumps. I can suspend my disbelief a little bit if it removes the inconvenience. Another progression issue is that while ability points and levels are shared between characters, gear isn't. So if you switch to a new character that you haven't played with in a while, you'll head out into the night with a bunch of abilities that you just grabbed and a spunky attitude, armed with a plastic maraca and wearing a Halloween costume for protection. While gear drops are frequent enough to get a decent weapon and armor not too long after heading out, it is annoying that for a while you're just unbelievably underpowered with a new character. I get how these pickups would only make sense for each player to have individually, they have different weapons and suits after all, but again, for the sake of the game's flow, just give me a few default gear drops for each level so I can have something of use when I switch characters. It's really not that hard. You reach a new level and you get okay gear, good enough to keep you afloat, but bad enough to make you still want to pursue better ones. So basically, visually customization is great, but the implementation is stinky, and all of that could have been avoided with a little bit of critical thinking, but why would you apply that to making a game? That would be silly. This section is going to be really quick. The detective stuff in this game is fine. It is better than the Arkham series, I'll say. I know some people don't like comparing the two, but I'm only ever going to bring it up as a metric of quality or lack thereof. Arkham had a lot of pointing and clicking, and if things ever got complicated, Batman would just solve it for you. They tried a lot of stuff with gadgets and rewindable crime scenes, but as far as actually solving puzzles and not just floating your cursor over them, you only really did that for Riddler challenges. But here, you can scour a crime scene or a suspicious area and actually try to piece the solution together. Yes, you can solve it by guessing pretty easily, and yes, it is usually very, very obvious what the solution is. The game will basically go, alright, these 3 chemicals killed the test subjects, and this one cured them of cancer, gave them a back rub, and fixed their daddy issues. Which one is the good option? Let me think. This one's real dubious. But at least there's an actual system here, and you're being asked to use the info around you to solve a problem. That's kinda all you can ask for, I guess. This one's a bit confusing because some of the bosses are really solid, but some of them are rinky-dink trailer trash. One thing that matters a lot to a boss's enjoyment is your level, because even if your character is 1 to 2 levels below what's recommended, you wind up slapping away at this health bar for 20 minutes. I fought Clayface pretty over-leveled, for example, and had a lot of fun with that fight, even though his moveset was really predictable, but Harley Quinn sucked. To be honest, I don't think this fight would have been any more fun if I was at a higher level. My brother and I actually decided to turn the difficulty down to easy because the fight was just annoying and broken, and I have no shame in that. I've beat some of the hardest games out there. I have nothing left to prove. This wasn't a test of difficulty, it was a test of patience with the level scaling and wonky AI. Fun fact, this fight was still hot garbage after we made that change. Harley has like 2 combos that she keeps repeating. The hitboxes for them were ridiculous. She would keep teleporting around like the goddamn Flash if you got too far, and she pulls my all-time favorite move during this fight, calling in 600 minions to her side to make it seem more dynamic. 99% of the time, this means that it's a bad boss trying to hide behind the guise of manufactured difficulty, and this is not in the last 1%, I'll tell you that much. It's long, it's boring, it's uninspired, it's dull, and I put more time into thinking of adjectives for this fight than WB Montreal took in designing it. Also, and seriously, spoilers for the ending here, I'll give you one last chance to click off if you want to. Okay, yeah, Bruce Wayne puts up a fight that you'd expect out of Alfred, not Batman. And Talia al Ghul combines the annoying repetitive dialogue of a JRPG villain.
I hope this hurts, Jason. I will revel in keeping you dead this time. This is your end, Jason. Accept your fate, and now to dispose of you, Red Hood. You are not strong enough to defeat me. You will never fail me again.
I agree. The health of Chansey, the damage of Mega Mewtwo X, and the endless combos followed by an immediate teleport away from you before you can do any damage of Sister Freed, aka my dream fight. Wow, this was so much fun. Can you tell from my voice how fun this was? But then you have the Clayface and Mr. Freeze fights, which range from simple and enjoyable to absolutely bonkers and inspired. Freeze especially has a lot of unique attacks, great visual design, and multiple phases. If you fight him at the right level, he has a case for one of the best fights in any Batman game. Granted, that's not the highest bar, but still. I don't know if maybe fighting most of these bosses co-op had any effect on how much I enjoyed or didn't enjoy them, but it was a real mixed bag. Some of these vastly improved the game, and others made me want to throw it into a fire. This is gonna be another quick one before we get into a really meaty section. I'm not really impressed by Gotham Knights visually. I think the ray tracing looks really good, but it's the only member of the group project doing any work, and the trade-off is the depressingly bad performance, so it can only be enjoyed in a vacuum. Just generally, the art direction seems very pedestrian. Everything is purple and neon to the point where it feels like the Kids Bop version of Gotham. There are a lot of interesting colors at times, blood moons, peering bright lights, but it all ended up looking like a toy. I could see why some people would like this, it's very much up to preference, but it kind of just looked like open world city number 307 now with gamer lights. Apart from the flying bat people, it just didn't stand out as Gotham City. The character models also look like a game from 7 years ago. The main cast looks alright, but outside of them, everyone looks textureless. Maybe it comes from the slightly cartoonish art style, but this doesn't seem like it's utilizing current gen hardware very effectively. And actually, you know what? I take back that 7-year comment because it's unfair to games that came out 7 years ago, like Arkham Knight. I'm sorry, everyone's been saying it already, but come on, man, what's going on here? The story of Gotham Knights is not very good. One part that is kind of good is the opening. This fight with Bruce and Ra's is well choreographed and creative, although I don't buy the fact that this is how Batman dies. Ra's did not seem like that much of a threat here compared to what we've seen throughout Batman media, and at one point Batman just stabs himself. Like, I'll be real, Bruce in this game kinda has a death wish. The man does not want to live. At multiple points in the story, he is looking for a solution that will kill him, even though by all accounts every other version of Batman I've seen and read would be able to survive these situations. Honestly, I think he just saw the combat system for this game and tried offing himself so he'd have nothing to do with it. One of my least favorite things about this story is that it refuses to let what should be a character-driven narrative be driven by the characters. Every single member of the Bat family has lost their friend and mentor and been thrust into a role that they probably feel unprepared for, and I feel no emotion from any of them. Remember how I mentioned that a supercut of the moments where this game is actually competent might be able to clock in at about an hour? Yeah, a supercut of the times where the Bat family feels actually impacted by Bruce Wayne's death would probably last less than 3 minutes. I mean, right after the man dies, they stand in a circle and deliver some of the most stilted dialogue I've ever heard. And as you head into the first mission, at least as Nightwing, you nod and smirk to yourself like an emote from an off-brand Batman Battle Royale game. The impact of their loss and responsibility is non-existent, and the only time it's ever felt is during these optional character missions that are usually just cutscenes that last about a minute each. Some of these are nice, Barbara trying to remember her dad, Tim and Alfred talking about the chess game Alfred had with Bruce that they would never finish, but the window into their characters is so brief that it just feels like a distraction compared to the rest of the game. These are 8 to 10 minute isolated stories that stretch out over what will likely be a 15 to 20 hour playthrough, which don't ever feel like they impacted these characters once they finish. I get how it might be hard to incorporate their growth from these stories into their overall actions in the rest of the game because of that structure, but Gotham Knights isn't off the hook for this because they chose to lay it out this way, to have the only actual character moments in their own little pockets of the game. All 4 characters also feel kind of like the same person with a tiny phase shift to the left or right. 90% of the dialogue between them could be switched around and said by somebody else, and it wouldn't be too out of character. Nightwing is a bit more of an action man, Tim is more naive, Batgirl is more techie, and Jason is more rash, but it's a dietized version of all those personality traits sprinkled onto some default archetype. And this is the most apparent with Jason Todd. Why he isn't the complex anti-hero from the comics and instead decided to play nice with the Bat family, why he decided to come back and use non-lethal armor-piercing rounds, is never explained. His story deals with him having lasting crazy cuckoo juice from the Lazarus Pit, which is fine, that can be an important foundation for his character, but they use it to just tell the player that he's an outsider and that he's worried about being an outsider. They only tell you this, they don't really show it. Wouldn't it be cool to have him insist on taking villains out permanently, with the group then bucking back and insisting they do it Batman's way? His trauma from his revival process defined his more unforgiving way of doing things in all other iterations of Red Hood, and when he worked with the Bat family, he'd always struggle with that conflict. But here he's just a straightforward hero who says he's scared of being on the outside and sometimes says the tough guy line. You had a great chance for an interesting character conflict here, but every single character, every single story beat is played so safe. This is a world where Batman and Jim Gordon are dead, and it somehow feels like it takes no risks. I also couldn't really get into Barbara's character at all because her voice was really grating to me. It sounded like she was a character from the Fairly Odd Parents. Any minute she was gonna start yelling about giant snakes, birthday cakes, large fries, and chocolate shakes. The actress's previous work includes a lot of Barbie movies, and I will say, she did carry over that energy here, there's no doubt. Honestly, I don't think this is the actress's fault, no hate to her, I just think this was a bad fit, and it made me dread watching her cutscenes. While the bland characters are the biggest issue of the story fundamentally because I feel like they never let the narrative take hold, the actual plot of the game is arguably a lot worse. For starters, the main story isn't very long, and even then it's ridiculously stretched out. I'm going to talk about mission structure soon, but a good portion of the main story had you going around doing menial tasks to move on to the next objective, and none of the villains or their plans were able to get fleshed out. The same thing happened with the side arcs, they ended very quickly and were padded by lazy open world missions. And then there's the Court of Owls. They're basically not present at all in the first 2 and last 2 chapters of an 8-chapter game. That is half for those of you who suffer from mathematical insanity, by the way. And when they were there, they had nothing that made their comic counterparts so fresh. I get that in this version they pounced on the fact that Batman was dead to really move forward with their big plans, but for a secret society that's existed in Gotham for centuries, they sure are hard to miss. The illusion of the court crumbles instantly, and it makes it feel like they either ditched the values that they'd had for hundreds of years, or Batman was quite possibly the dumbest detective who ever lived. And on top of that, they become side villains in their own game, because the League of Shadows is part of this too, and they're really boring. They only really matter at the end for the sake of a couple of bad twists. It reeks of coming up with cool scenes and then working your way backwards to make those scenes happen, but then because it feels so set up, those scenes no longer seem cool. I was really hoping the story of Gotham Knights could carry it into decent territory, but it dropped the ball way too often for it to show anything more than a pang of brilliance every few hours. It also ends with a long chalkboard scratch instead of a bang. The last few missions, I was like, what are we doing here? With 5 man-bat fights? Why is this here now? And it really says something that we're about 15 minutes into this video and I just ragged on the story for the last 5, and it's still not even close to my least favorite part of the game. Before we continue, me editing here, I'm a little bit sick if you couldn't tell, but just wanted to say, if you're enjoying the video, consider subscribing, and also join the Discord if you want to talk about new games, upcoming releases, general game mechanics and concepts, everything I talk about on this channel. It'll be linked in the description, go check it out, and enjoy the rest of the video. The UI looks yucky. I made a whole video on UI recently, and while this game doesn't commit all of the sins that I talked about there, it is sure trying its best. Just like Gotham, the UI looks like it's been designed for a toddler. It's a bunch of big bright colors and numbers, and even just navigating the menu results in this weird guitar plucking sound when you switch tabs. Yeah, I'm complaining about the menu sound design. This is my longest video ever for a reason. Like I said before, I don't know why you can access the menu to craft items, but then you have to go to the belfry for it to actually appear in your inventory. Like, if you're gonna insist on not letting me use it immediately, then just don't give me the crafting option at all in the open world. The evidence board never felt like it had any significance. I would go there sometimes because the game forced me to, but it was tacked on and useless, and even the skill tree navigation was clunky. You could use the D-pad to move around it, but there was no way to go diagonal. Most games would take you here if you press right and here if you pressed right again, so you could access everything. But the D-pad makes it literally impossible to select some of these. You gotta use the analog stick, which has weird sensitivity ranges. I get that this section is crazy nitpicky, but I think some of the smaller oversights and kinks really show how fundamentally fractured this game is. Nothing works how you'd expect or want it to. Alright, we are finally at arguably the most important section. If even one of the two major parts of this game, the combat and the story, were rock solid, I would have been a lot nicer to it. I just needed something, but the story was a wash and the combat is even worse. The first thing I need to say is that this game feels like it runs at 0.5 speed. If you literally just sped up the footage, it looks a lot better, but the animations themselves are a core problem. Don't get me wrong, the animations are the best part of the combat in some ways. They're very acrobatic, there's some cool finishers, really creative takedowns, and a lot of flipping around, but so many of these actions in the middle of regular combat are way too long. At times, the delay from your input to the moment your attack lands is enough to grab a mid-game snack, and different animations will lead to different delay times. Even while not playing it, my roommate's first reaction when looking over at the game was that it looked really slow. It takes a while to get your footing and get a bit faster, but honestly, the only reason I could stand the game's combat by the end was because I played mostly as Robin after a certain point. I cannot stress enough the difference in quality between him and the other characters. Even with most of the combat mastered and a lot of momentum abilities unlocked, there were still a lot of issues with spacing, access, AI, hit registration, everything. The fundamentals of Gotham Knights combat are all out of whack. For example, in a game like Arkham or Spider-Man, the combat lets you fling yourself around the battlefield with long acrobatic moves and flips. It's very arcadey, but it works well with large groups. Other games like Ghost of Tsushima and Sifu take a bit of a different approach. They slow down and tighten your movements a lot more and turn groups into almost a series of individual battles that you need to duck and weave in and out of. You'll hone in on someone and throw in a few good licks, dodge and parry their attacks, focus in, and then when another enemy attacks from the rear, you slip out of your solo fight, readjust, and maybe move on to somebody else. These intentions are mirrored in the combat style. Batman's got a lot of flying kicks and lets you play loose enough to switch targets with every punch if you want. And Sifu's dodges in close proximity are head tilts. You stay the same distance away, you're just repositioning your body and weave in and out of your opponent's attacks. They're generally under the same combat family, but based on how they want the game to feel, they design the combat and player actions very differently. Gotham Knights in comparison looks like it can't really decide what to do, and it plays poorly as a result. When you perfect dodge, you can come back with a counter, but regular dodges send you far away from enemies, so these tight encounters no longer exist. But you also can't move from person to person as effectively because the game doesn't want to imitate Arkham and snap you to the opponent that you want to focus on, and it forces you to spam flips and rolls to move between them. You're left with this really awkward middle point where you don't have satisfying solo fights and you don't have snappy group fights. The reason Robin's the best to play with is that his staff has a decent range and the motion effects that they put on it convey impact well, but Nightwing, for example, spends most of his time farting around trying to get to people, and when he does fight someone, it feels like I'm just watching Flats punch SpongeBob. There's hardly any impact. This game really puts the E in free flow. The camera also sucks, it gets stuck all the time, and the game never wants to send ranged attacks where I want. I'll be fighting somebody over here, I've punched them like 8 times in a row, I'm clearly targeting this person, I'll hold the ranged button and the game will go, huh, that trash can looks pretty menacing, better take it out. The difficulty only affects how spongy the enemies are. It's not a test of metal, you don't need to adjust your strategy, you just gotta punch people way more. I'd actually recommend this game on lower difficulties. I played it on medium, and when I was overpowered, the game actually started getting a bit more enjoyable. Usually I hate ripping through groups like Silly Putty, but here it was nice to only have to punch every goon 4 times instead of 40, and having a reasonable sized health bar for some of the bosses vastly improved them. The final boss sucks though, I really do believe that. Maybe she's just jacked up with adrenaline for co-op, but the windows to attack her barely existed, and the game's momentum system, which does a lot of damage in your fights, completely crumbles when it's legitimately impossible to get a sequence of hits in. You can't parry in this game, and the ranged attacks don't stagger, so in the fight I just dodge dodge, 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 get a single hit in, and then she'd teleport away. It was so lame. The same goes for the Talon and League of Shadows enemies. Just as I got more powerful and started to think I could turn my brain off and enjoy this combat a bit more, you give me constantly teleporting ninjas and dudes that you can only stun with a broken ass ranged mechanic. Thanks. Is this the worst combat system I've ever played? No. Did it have some potential? Yeah. But when the AI is as basic as it is here and you have encounters that feel like they're going through an identity crisis, it's hard to enjoy the flashiness of it all. Maybe other people are more forgiving on the combat than I am, but I found its design very obtuse, its controls clunky, and its enemies brain dead, so what's left to enjoy at that point? For the rest of the video, everything I mentioned is basically the same level of awful. I can't differentiate between it all, except for the last section, which is definitively the worst part of the game. The open world of Gotham Knights is dead boring. It has no bold iconography, the architecture isn't inventive, the streets are not exciting, and the side content is laughable. There are time trials and hidden caches, but this has got to be some of the laziest versions of this stuff that I've ever seen. You'll get a timer and the game will say, walk on top of these blue lights on the ground. Hey you, superhero guy, go walk around on blue lights. At least when Spider-Man had us taking pictures and catching pigeons, menial Spider-Man things, we did it while flipping and zipping around, getting into chases, maneuvering through corners. There were some boring Spider-Man side missions for sure, but it wasn't walking on top of lights. Like what? Every side character you meet is a robot with no distinct personality, and every crime is just beat up 4 guys and then you're done. Speaking of crimes, doing these basically gives you clue points that'll give you intel on premeditated crimes for the next night that you can go and tackle on your next patrol, which almost sounds cool if you're Steve from Blue's Clues. You go and beat people up so you can build this bar up, and the next time you leave the Belfry there's more people to beat up, but you know about them this time. There's no stories here, no significance, just bland open world stuff. So okay, I wasn't gonna platinum this game, I didn't want to spend copious amounts of time with it, so is it really that bad that the side stuff kinda sucks? Yes, because the game forces you to do it all the time. The moment you realize this game wants nothing but pain for you is right around the 5-minute mark once you hear the characters talking for the first time. But the second time you realize it is when you learn about knighthood. Basically, the Bat family is a bunch of soup-brained Neanderthals that have been fighting crime for years, but with all of Bruce Wayne's resources and their supposedly massive Chungus brains, haven't found out how to traverse the city properly. So for each individual character, you need to complete 10 premeditated crimes to unlock their traversal abilities. You do the loop that I just mentioned earlier. Go out, do crimes, get more clues, go back, leave, do crimes, get clues, do it over and over until you've done 10 of these. If you play it right, you can get it done in one cycle, but that requires you to do even more random crimes, and why would I choose the option where I have to play more of this game? You also have to do this all while only being able to grapple or drive around the city, because again, you're doing this to get your traversal, you don't have it yet. 10 premeditated crimes takes a lot longer than you'd expect, but the good thing is you have to do it with every character you want to unlock the traversal of. Did I say good thing? I meant you, game. Now, you could stick to one character and forgo this hellscape for the rest, but I also wouldn't have found out that Robin was the only bearable character if I'd done that, and the game tries to promote switching things up with universal ability points and stuff, so it's unbelievably counterintuitive to force you to play an extra 40 to 50 minutes just to unlock a basic part of one character. And you know what the worst part is? Spoiler alert, Traversal is the last section of this video, which if you remember, means it's the worst part of this game. The reward for this menial task that you have to complete 4 times at the very start just to have proper access to your characters is the video game equivalent of smallpox. Also, how does solving these crimes even relate to getting traversal methods? For all of these characters, they just go back to the Belfry afterwards, look at Bruce's suit, and come to a realization or something. Like Robin realizes that he can create a teleportation device somehow, and Batgirl looks at Bruce's cape and makes modifications on hers so she can use it to fly. You're telling me that this whole time she didn't have the right material on her cape to fly? Why was it there then? What, Bruce was gliding over rooftops to fight Bane or something and Barbara was just sprinting across the freeway underneath him? What's going on here? How did punching all those people give Nightwing the inspiration for making a Fortnite glider? I don't understand what's happening. The forced open world activities aren't relegated to just the weird opening though. Main mission cases and the 3 big side cases all feature some blatantly lazy objectives that have you going around doing the same optional crimes. It's not even hidden. They don't even reskin crimes for the main missions to make them seem different. The game doesn't even have the decency to do that. It'll just say do 5 freak crimes or do 5 mob crimes as the main objectives. And even when they try to hide it a bit, it seems even lazier. Like, this detective tells you to go stop the corrupt GCPD detectives, and how do you do that? You go to the open world crimes, you scan to see if there's a corrupt GCPD detective there, and you fight them. This isn't a main mission, this is a green overlay on your crappy side activities. Some of these mandatory missions seem so unrelated to the story at hand that they could have children together and there would be absolutely no complications. That's a wildly specific diss, but this game absolutely deserves it. This is the case with a lot of the side missions too. I thought only having 3 side villains would mean that they'd get a proper focus, but all 3 of them just have a small lead up to the villain's narrative, 2 boss fights, a couple of cutscenes, and the rest is basically open world BS. The actual content that's directly connected to the villain and their plans lasts for about 15 to 20 minutes each. I'm barely beginning to understand their motivations by the time I'm already done with their story. It's ridiculous. Even the unique parts of this game get stretched to oblivion. Near the end, you fight the Man-Bat in Arkham Asylum, and it's not a great fight, but you're like, okay, that was different at least. But then you go into the open world and have to fight a Man-Bat on the roof of 3 different buildings, and then the next mission you fight him again. You never see this guy at all, and then you fight him 5 times in 40 minutes, and then he's gone again. And the fights are bad too. It would have been fine if it was a one-off thing, but they're long and tedious, and eventually extra enemies from the League of Assassins show up, and they're already horrendous enemy types, and I was just tired at this point. The emotional trauma of the Man-Bat jump scares in Arkham Knight was a better boss fight than these 5 combined. The only real fun that this game provided me was giving me an excuse to play something with my brother, but I need to make it clear that I had fun talking to him in spite of the game, not because of it. For a game that has 2-player baked into its identity, it sure has an unbelievably rough co-op experience. Like way too many games nowadays that throw this feature into the mix, Gotham Knights does not encourage you to work together. It doesn't promote synergy, planning, complementing playstyles and characters, anything. It's just 2 people individually doing things beside each other that they would have been doing even if they were playing single player. The only time the co-op felt cool was the Labyrinth, because the characters were trying to communicate with each other, they were acknowledging each other's existence, and they met up near the end to escape. Props to the game for making it so easy for the other player to drop in at any time and also letting you go off to do separate things if you want, but it turns into Swiss cheese when you do any of that. There were points where I couldn't tell if this game was running on Unreal Engine 5 or PowerPoint 6. You get too far away, or worse, you dare to fast travel while the other person is free roaming, and it looks like your game might actually explode. I mean, it's bad. I get that this stuff is hard to implement untethered co-op in an open world, but Gotham Knights suffers from an optimization standpoint outside of co-op as well. Fighting together also never really feels that great. Sometimes you'll see a finisher from the other player just performed on thin air. And while it does have some team up moves, not only are they incredibly awkward to pull off, you need to grab and hold the enemy and the other guy has to walk to a very specific point. It can't be too far to the back or sides of you and press a button. Very fluid. But each character only has 1 takedown with that specific partner, so every time you press the team takedown button, you just see the same goddamn animation. Are you kidding? Dude, this is a co-op game. The one co-op thing you can do is just the same clunky setup and then the same move every time? Honestly, the only thing that this game did that made the co-op more fun was be so frustrating that my brother and I just made fun of it for the whole campaign. The highlight of the entire game had nothing to do with it at all. It was when my brother was annoyed at a boss fight and got caught between saying, "I'm gonna kill myself," and "I'm pissed off," and said with full chest, "I'm gonna piss myself." That is the only positive moment I will take away from this. Listen, I'm not a performance snob or anything, but there is a difference between 30 and 60 FPS, and if you played a lot of games at 60 FPS, because a lot of games in the past couple years have been at 60 FPS, you really start noticing that difference. It kind of strains your eyes a little bit when you go back to 30, and especially if it's not locked, then the damage that's done when you drop 5 frames from 30 to 25 is way more noticeable than a game dropping from 60 to 55. That's not some elitist claim, that's just how the math works. Lucky for us, Gotham Knights doesn't regularly drop 5 frames below its intended rate. It regularly drops 10 to 15 frames below it, especially during co-op. The only person who'd like this frame rate is Drake, because it's under 18. Gotham Knights is not enjoyable to look at. It started giving me a headache because it ran very poorly, even in solo play, and as a separate but equally as important note, it crashed a lot for me, like 5 or 6 times. I surprisingly didn't get a lot of bugs, which I've heard are rampant in this game, so I can't speak to that, but the ones that I did get were just weird, like Jason's hoodie string stiffening up and jutting outwards, or Nightwing's funky dance. The bigger concern to me was just how it ran in solo, and especially in co-op. It just felt like shoddy craftsmanship. And if everything else I've talked about so far was a massive underdelivery on ideas, weird issues that shouldn't have been much of a problem, and just generally an ill-advised direction for the game, this part is just genuinely not built properly. It's broken. But all that said, it's not the worst thing about the game. Here we are, finally, at the last section, the part of Gotham Knights that fills me with the most hate, the part that makes me go, what the shit did WB Montreal? I've been talking about this for way too long, my brain is turning into mush. I really despise the traversal in Gotham Knights. If you've watched me for a while, you know that I think that traversal in superhero games is just as important as story and combat. This is a big part of why I love these games, and it's a big part of why I hate this one. I think the craziest part to me is that 3 of these 4 traversal methods on their own would have probably been one of my least favorite traversal methods of all time. Just by themselves, I would have said, huh? Who signed off on this? The fact that they did it 3 times in the same game isn't just bad, it's not just incompetent content, it feels straight up disrespectful. Like, I've been joking around this whole video, I didn't like this game, but I was trying to bring some energy, you know, but this made me actually angry while I was playing it, no joke. So let's tackle them all in the same fashion as the rest of the video, from best to worst. The Batcycle is the definition of a boring open-world vehicle. I will give it this, it handles pretty well and it doesn't do anything offensively bad, like it actually works. But like a lot of people have mentioned, it's also really slow. There's no boost, no second gear, you just kind of drive the speed limit like a law-abiding citizen and the game tries to fool you into thinking you're going quickly. How about you just, I don't know, let me actually go quickly? It genuinely baffles me that they cap the speed like this, and they do it for every traversal method. It's all really slow. I think it might be for loading purposes. I mean, the popping in some areas was crazy, but again, we're in the PS5, Xbox Series X generation, and you ditched last-gen consoles. How are you still struggling this hard? Compared to the Batmobile and Arkham Knight, the Batcycle is just kind of pathetic. The speed, especially when you boosted, the smooth handling, being able to eject out of it with force, dive directly back into it, you just don't get any of that here. People had problems with the Bat Tank, but the Tumbler was a great way to get around, and here the best way to travel this city still pales in comparison to Rocksteady's take. It's a little bit sad when your best character traversal method is still busted up even after you copied somebody else's homework. I understand not wanting to stick too closely to the Arkham games, but that doesn't mean creating a weird B-Tech version of those systems. WB Montreal has access to what Rocksteady built in Arkham City, and they probably have access to their work on Arkham Knight as well if they wanted, being under the same parent company, but somehow Batgirl's traversal is a massive step backwards. When you dive in the other games, you can get out of that dive, catch the wind with your cape, and shoot upwards. Doing this regularly increases your speed and keeps you airborne longer, so you can traverse the whole city without hitting the ground once, especially if you throw some grapples in there. In Gotham Knights, Batgirl will sometimes come out of a dive and shoot upwards, but other times she'll just descend slowly. In each of these clips, I'm doing the exact same thing with my thumbstick, but getting different results at random, and even weirder is the fact that sometimes you'll dive, come out of it, start descending, and then shoot upwards later. I can basically see the game blowing a fuse in the background trying to figure out how the physics are supposed to work. Even the grapple, which every character has, isn't nearly as fun to play around with. By the time Arkham Knight came out, you could just shoot off of any ledge you grappled onto. It was a way to fling yourself up and forward at high velocities, but here the best you can do is grapple and then move into a jump, which has a distinct hitch that really ruins the flow. So what about the other characters? Do they fare any better? Of course not, because I told you it only gets worse. Now, Nightwing's traversal is actually far more functional than Batgirl's. It is annoying when you accidentally brush up against a wall and get flung in the opposite direction during time trials, but you have a much better sense of control here. The problem with this glider is a little bit different. It's unbearably boring. This is Nightwing's traversal. I remind you, this is a superhero game. There's no skill, no real inputs, no speed boost, no anything. You hold a button and slowly glide from place to place. What can I even say here? At least with a paraglider in Just Cause or something, you're moving faster and there's a slow descent, so you eventually gotta switch things up. But here, you just point to where you wanna go and you go there. Slowly. Kill me. Surprisingly, Jumping Magic Guy isn't last. Unsurprisingly, he still sucks. Just the idea of hippity-hoppitying through Gotham City is ridiculous enough as is, but this is also another anti-fun traversal method. You aren't asking the player to do anything except point and spam a button. There's no real enjoyment here, and it takes a page out of Batgirl's book and also randomly breaks. You're supposed to be constantly jumping forwards, but sometimes you jump and the game just sends you up, straight into the air. Why does it stop working? Couldn't tell you, but Red Hood really hit you with the double whammy of not being fun and not being functional. That's what you like to hear, baby. And of course, the character with the best combat has the most insufferable movement. Why wouldn't that be the case? I am 100% serious when I say that I can't wrap my head around the fact that anyone could think this is fun in a superhero game. I'm convinced that the devs don't even think that. To traverse as Robin, you jump in the air and then hold a button and turn into a dot. A little dot of light that can move around for 7 seconds and then you turn back into Robin. I legit can't even put into words how unbelievably stupid this is, and clearly I can put a lot of things into words. This video is 40 minutes long. How in the hell is this teleportation? I don't care if Robin's teleporting to the dot in-universe. What about me, the guy playing this godforsaken game? I'm not teleporting, I'm a moving dot. I swear to God, this thing moves slower than your running speed on the ground. How did you make teleportation lame? Just make it real time or something. Have me zip around with a quick opportunity to aim, or, you know, don't teleport as Robin? You couldn't have thought of anything better? All 4 of these methods of getting around were so infuriating, broken, boring, and backwards that I desperately wanted to fast travel everywhere, and I was so happy when Lucius Fox finally told me that I could skip large sections of the game, which is a pretty sad feeling to have if you're playing as a superhero. And guess what? Even the fast travel sucks. You don't have to open up a radio tower or climb up a building to unlock them. No, you go to these fast travel points and you have to find these little drones. You just sit there and scan 2 or 3 to unlock the fast travel. It's annoying and they're sometimes hard to find and get out of your range really quickly, but also some of them are shielded from being scanned. What? So you have to sit there and watch these little bastards buzz around for 30 seconds or more just doing little loop-de-loops, and then they sit down and you scan them. Wow, riveting gameplay. Explain to me how this enhances the experience again. I think I can comfortably say that Gotham Knights Traversal, a major part of the game that you have to engage with throughout the entire experience, and need I remind you, is locked behind open world objectives for every single character, is the worst traversal I have ever played in a video game. Barring anything that actually doesn't work properly, I've either played games with much better systems or ones where getting around in frustrating ways is far more optional than it is here. This sucks, and I'm officially tired of talking about it. Gotham Knights feels busted down to its foundation. It's only outright broken in some areas, though in those areas it's very, very broken, but the rest of it is overrun with uninspired decisions, mechanics that seem to hate the concept of joy, and a severe lack of polish. As a fan of Batman and the Bat family as a whole, and somebody who likes to like things more than he likes to hate them, it was gonna take a lot for this game to not be at least okay for me, and yet here it is, hitting that incredibly low bar for failure. I think it might be one of my least favorite games I've ever played, which might sound harsh, but it's just how I feel. For it to take so many things that should be exciting for somebody like me and then execute each one at gunpoint makes me hate it even more than games that are straight up unplayable. My voice is disappearing, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've got some fun stuff coming up, so subscribe, join the Discord, it's in the description, like the video, leave a comment, all that, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.